Welcome to another episode of Dax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Venngage. Venngage is a design platform that's not just about creating stunning visuals, but also about inclusivity and accessibility. Venngage doesn't just simplify your design process, but takes it up a notch higher with built-in accessibility features. Whether you're looking to run an accessibility check on your designs or export them in the PDF UA format, Venngage has got you covered. So head on over to venngage.com and check them out. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am also an accessibility wizard here, senior trainer at Chax Training and Consulting. I forgot where I worked there for a second, Chad. Just brain was going off. I literally was 4 thoughts ahead already and just was like thinking of other things and went, wait a minute, I've got to finish the intro. Right. So
that's my ADHD partner there.
Completely full disclosure. Right. But if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know that my tangential thoughts are varied. So, but yeah, no, Chad and I are both senior trainers, right? We're no better or worse than each other. And, we love working with people on document accessibility. And if you'd like your certification, a lot of people ask me, how do you get your certification? Where do you go? Well, the first one that's probably one of the most important ones is the ADS certification. So you can head over to IAAP's website, accessibilityassociation.org/certifications, and get more information about how to apply to take the certification test. So definitely go visit our good friends over at IAAP.
Absolutely. And, Dax, I get a lot of inquiries from people who are like, how do I study for the ADS? Right. And I mean, the one thing I tell them is the ADS, they do provide you with a body of knowledge that kind of goes over, the general content. But I really firmly believe that just doing this work, right? Like if you do this work for a period of time and you've done a bunch of documents and you're familiar with, the concepts of tagged PDF and what's required, that's really going to get you through. I mean, I still encourage you to check out the body of knowledge. That'll kind of give you an idea of what you can expect to be on the test. But I will tell you, Dax and I, we helped to write the exam, and there's none of the questions that are trying to just blatantly trip you up. Like they're not going to ask you these crazy off the wall questions. Most of them are very right. Like this is what you need to know if you're going to be doing this type of work. Wouldn't you agree, Dax?
Well, it's interesting, Chad. So I lost one of my puffer fish this last week. I did a water change, too much cold water, and literally killed one of my very prized, very expensive fish. And was on my way down to Stockton, Modesto, to get another puffer somebody happened to have this really large puffer that was growing too big for their tank. And so I was able to take it off their hands. While I was driving, I was listening to an audiobook. I don't read. I've never read a book since high school. I burned myself out reading a 3-part novel, a series of science adventure books. And since then, I've never picked up another book and sat down and read. I just can't. But I was reading this book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. It's by Cal Newport. And the subtitle is Why Skills Trump Passion in the Quest for Work You Love. And it was a really eye-opening book because it really did validate a lot of how I fell into this, right? People say, do what you love, right? Accessibility is your passion, do it. The reality is they interviewed 400 people and the majority of them did not say, here's my passion, let me figure out how I'm going to make money. Matter of fact, most of those people failed. The people that succeeded were the people that said, here's a job. I'm going to get better than anybody else at this job. And then they learned to love it. And it became the thing that really drove them. And I feel like that's kind of where I fell in, is that somebody said, hey, who knows about accessibility? I said, I'll learn. And I really just, really focused on learning and understanding what it means to make something accessible. And you and I have had this conversation before where we're like, the difference between me sitting on this side of the microphone and someone listening to this conversation has been doing it for a couple of years is how many times have you cracked open the ISO standard and looked at the different tables inside that standard to understand what a non-struct tag is, or when to use an LI, or do you know what a circle or ellipse is from a bullet standpoint as a qualified bullet figure, right? All these different things, what an AS key is when it comes to a PDF document, which, by the way, is if your document has layers, you're going to have an AS key. That's why you get that error in common look. So flatten your document, that'll go away. But the difference really is I've spent the time studying, and the story further went on to say, chess masters, there's two schools of thought: go do a bunch of tournaments, or study your butt off reading all these books and past stuff. And what they found was the guys who were phenomenally good were the ones who studied more than twice or three times as much as the people who just were inherently good and went to all these tournaments. So to bring this all full circle, take the time to study. Go do the deep dive research. Yes, I 100% agree with you that you can be just good by doing the job. You can learn it and you can be okay. Definitely probably pass the IAAP test. But if you really want to separate yourself from others, go study. Do the things, the book work that you understand what a span tag is and why it's there, how it influences the content or not. Test your documents with a screen reader. Understand what that user experience is like. Chad, I think you and I test our documents more than most people would with a screen reader. But you would probably agree that I test things a little bit more. I think from a user standpoint, I'm probably a little bit ahead of you from a user experience and understanding that just off the top of my head, remembering what those experiences are like. But we are leaps and bounds, both of us together, leaps and bounds ahead of the people who ask us constantly on the Facebook group or wherever, what does it sound like when, right?
Right. And like a lot of times I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Sure. Like it's not my goal to memorize how a screen reader voices everything in a document. That I don't really care. Right.
Yeah.
But when I have that question, like when I ask the question myself, or when somebody else says, how is this voiced in a screen reader? I crack open the document, I read it with a screen reader, and I'm like, oh, this is how it voices it. Right.
Yeah.
And also remember that not, between JAWS and NVDA, they will voice things differently. So it's really hard to give that black and white answer of, oh, this is how it's going to be voiced, because I think you would agree, Dax, a lot of times we have to say, well, in NVDA, it's going to sound like this. In JAWS, it's going to sound like this,
Well, and I think more NVDA and JAWS are slightly different. I think JAWS tries to use more context to figure out how to say things, and it gets it wrong sometimes more often. But it's more the difference between Apple VoiceOver and NVDA, or Dragon Naturally Speaking, or Speechify, or Adobe Read Aloud. Right? All those programs read wildly different. Listening to it in a browser versus listening to it on your desktop. All of those things create very different user experiences. And when we get the question all the time of, hey, when I'm listening to this in the browser, it sounds this way. How do I fix that? Go talk to Google and ask them to fix Chrome, or, there's really not a way you as a user can fix that experience, because you may fix it for the browser, but you're going to maybe mess it up for a person using Acrobat.
Right. And I mean, tagging on to what you just said, I mean, Adobe recently released a plugin for Chrome that definitely improves that experience, right?
Sure.
Because you and I have said, I remember, do you remember that time I had an appointment with a client, and she's like, I went to your NVDA class and I'm doing everything you told me to, and nothing is reading in my document. And I got on a meeting with her, and the first thing I noticed is she had it open in a web browser.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was mad at myself that I didn't think about that right away, right? Because that's a surefire way of getting it to fail is to open it in a web browser. But
Well,
yeah.
for those of you listening, Chad just brought up a good point. If you get stuck with something, we are here for you. We are not on a pillar in a castle high on a cloud. We are a click away. Go to the website accessibilityunraveled.com and click at the very top. There's a one-on-one solutions consulting. Book some time with us, right? It's not that expensive. And I will tell you that most of your problems we can solve in 15 to 30 minutes easily. And the $50 or $100 it might cost to get that done saves you hours of headache and frustration, because we have been through it, and we have, honestly, it sounds a little self-serving, but we have the solutions. I mean, really, we do. And if we don't, we can figure it out, because we've gone through so many troubleshooting sessions and know kind of how to explore it.
Well, and I will tell you, like, I have a couple of clients who regularly book time with me just to run ideas past me. Yeah. Right. Like, just to be like, hey, I need another person. And unfortunately, they don't have anybody within their organization who they can, run things by. And they'll just book the one guy this week. He booked 15 minutes with me. Right. Yeah. Just because he had a few key questions he wanted to ask. And then he was good to go. Then he went off and was working on his own. So yeah, and that we are here.
And then I had another person book some time with me. They were interested. They had a form, and the form had a bunch of calculations in it. And they were trying to figure out how to make it accessible, because you put a value in a form field at the very top, and then it changes the values in the rest of the form as you fill it out. Think of like funds, choosing funds in a mutual fund, and then giving your rate of return is a variable that you can change, right? Well, accessibility says that if values change based on input, you have to let the user know, hey, you just put something in this field that changed this other field. Let's say you put something in field 4 and it changed field 20. Something has to tell the user you changed field 20, right? Or maybe the other way around. Something in field 20 changed a value you've already filled out, right? So the user has to know, hey, you input a investment amount in field 20, that changed your contribution maximum in field 4. So there's some nuanced stuff that goes into some of this stuff, and we can help you sort through that. Now, in their case, the reality was there wasn't much that they could do. Their form was designed in Adobe Lifecycle, and so there was a lot of restriction on what they could do. So which actually brings us to a really important point: designing with accessibility in mind. I know we're 12 minutes into this podcast, but really the topic we wanted to talk about today, Chad, is design fails, pitfalls for ignoring accessibility in design as you design. We call this designing with accessibility in mind, or born accessibility. And we really wanted to focus today on giving you some major milestones or major categories of things you should be thinking about as you design documents, so that when you're at the end, you don't turn around and go, okay, now I can make it accessible, and you've painted yourself into a corner that's going to take you hours to get yourself out of.
Absolutely. So, one of the first things we wanted to talk about, Dax, right? Number one is, why design accessibility matters, right? And, what we're really talking about here is, designing, we're all, not all of us, I'm sorry, but many of us are graphic designers, right? And as a graphic designer, we're communicators, right? Like, that's our job, is to communicate with other people, traditionally visually, right? Like, as a graphic designer, traditionally our job is to visually communicate with other people. But many of us have been tasked with also making that content accessible. And all that really means, Dax, is that we need to expand our reach beyond visual alone, right?
And well, we know that when you design with accessibility in mind, you benefit everyone. it's clearer layouts, it's easier to read, it's organized content. It's all of those things that really are just solid design principles that maybe you didn't go to school to learn, or maybe you've weeded your way out of, you've gotten to the habit of doing it a different way. So why design accessibility matters is the unintended benefit is when you think about design from an accessibility standpoint, you have to defend what you're doing and why, and it makes it better for everyone.
It really does. It really does. I mean, an example that I'd like to give, what drives me crazy, Dax, is when I'm driving down the highway and I see a billboard. I can't read anything that's on the billboard.
Right.
You know, the text is too small. It's way too busy, and it's completely lost on me. I have no idea what it's about. And you and I both have billboard design experience in our previous lives, if you will. But you know, like the whole point of a billboard is to capture the user's attention very quickly, you know, have your call to attention, right? And make your message very clear. But when I'm driving by some of these billboards, I'm like, I have no idea what they're trying to tell me. I don't even know who's behind the advertisement. I don't know who the company is, you know? So and that's a classic example, I think, of, that's an accessibility fail, right? Because I am not able to process that information appropriately.
Well, in our past lives, I used to design billboards for lawyers. And, you know, if you or someone you love has been hurt in an accident, call the law offices of Johnson & Johnson, right? So, you know, I used to design billboards. I've designed full bus wraps. I've designed different things for stadiums, all sorts of things. But what gets me is that there's no font hierarchy. Font size is important because it tells me as a user, where do I start? I'm going to start with the biggest thing and move my way down. That gives me reading order. There's a visual reading order there. And when everything is close to the same font, or something's really big and the rest of everything is really small, when it says got hurt or in an accident and it's giant text and then everything is really small, like you said, you have 3 seconds to read something as you're driving down the highway going 65, hopefully 65. And I don't know who the company was or what phone number to call. Yeah. And so I see these people put their big faces on the thing, but I don't remember who they are. And, it's just their logo or tagline. The main focus, it's probably not the phone number, unless it's really recognizable. 1-800-accident or 1-800 got hurt, right? But typically it's the firm name. Tell me who you are and I'll go remember that and go look it up, or I'll Google it or whatever. So it's that kind of thing. So this accessible design benefits everyone. And on the vein of font size, color contrast is also so important. Now, where you and I were talking before the podcast about where you view something. If I'm driving down the highway and that sign has been hit by the sun every sunset for the past year, and that red is now faded yellowish orange, that's not necessarily something you can control, but whoever put that billboard location together should know what that is, right? But we were in a restaurant when we were at a conference one time, and you want to tell the rest of that story?
Yeah, and I mean, this happens to me more often than not, right? I mean, you go into a restaurant and for one, it's dimly lit, right? Which is by design, right? They want it dimly lit. I don't exactly know the purpose for that. I think it's to set the mood. I used to think it was
so they can charge more.
So they could charge more. I used to think it was so that you couldn't really see the food, but I don't think that's true. I just think they want to kind of set the mood, which I respect that. But then they hand me a menu that's, I swear to God, Dax, I mean, a lot of times the font is like 7 point, maybe 8 point. And, there was plenty of room on the menu to make that text bigger, to make it larger and easier to read. But they just chose not to. And that's getting back to, as a graphic designer, you've got to think about the environment in which something is going to be viewed, whether it's a billboard or a restaurant menu. Doesn't really matter. You got to think about the environment. And
Chipotle kills me. I walk up to Chipotle to order, and every couple months they redo their menu, and they've got it in like I'm 20 feet away from the menu and it's in like 6-point type. I literally have to pull out my phone to read the menu because it's just so small. So when it comes to document accessibility, people always think of screen readers, but people who use screen readers are a fairly small component of the people we're designing documents for. So yes, somebody can zoom in 5,000%, but why should I have to? I should be able to read your main message and understand clearly what's going on. And if I have some kind of color deficiency, I might use high contrast mode or something else, but making sure that you've got good color contrast to begin with is going to help those people that are in the margin that don't necessarily go into high color contrast mode, but it's just a strain for them because they've either got a crappy monitor or they just have a color deficiency or, whatever. So
I brought this up before. I was at a restaurant and I wasn't even inside. It was outside, when you view the menu on the front of the restaurant, and it was on yellow paper and the headings were yellow. Oh. And I'm like, I don't understand how this failed so badly. You know what I mean? But that's one example of where contrast, even for somebody, I mean, I've got pretty good sight. I do wear glasses now, but even for somebody with fairly decent sight, that was difficult for me to read, Yeah. So I think it's really important. The color contrast is an easy, if you do it at the beginning of the process, it's an easy problem to address, right?
Right.
Don't wait till the end. Don't wait till it's been past a number of eyes and approval has been made, because by then, now it's hard, right? And not just in the sense of getting reapproval, right? Running it past, we're going to change this,
hard. People hate change.
So, in that case, you want to make sure you address it at the beginning of the process, because that's when it's the easiest to fix.
If you take our Designing with Accessibility in Mind class, we give away a free InDesign script that will take your color palette and do all the combinations. It'll mix all the different colors together and show you, hey, if you have this blue with this yellow and this green with this orange, and it gives you this kind of grid of here are the colors that don't pass compliance and here are the ones that do. And so you can weed it out and figure out, these are my combinations that I should be using. And I developed this script through Luis Corillian is my scripter, and he did a great job in putting this together. But the other thing that it can do is it can compare just two colors in 10% tints, because sometimes you're like, okay, I want blue and I want, purple. And I want to know at what percentage of these colors does it still work? And so it will do that. So it's a really great thing. So if you go to our website, accessibilityunraveled.com, and look for the Designing with Accessibility in Mind class, almost every one of our classes come with some handout or plugin or something really great. So definitely take a look at that. So speaking of color, Chad, relying on color as the only way to communicate information. We see this a lot in bar charts and pie graphs and things like that, where people will color the bars different colors, and then the legend is the only way to tell the story, right? And that's a major problem.
It is a major problem. It's a major problem for a number of reasons. I mean, for one, again, the number of people in the world who have a color deficiency, they could be colorblind, they could be, low vision, whatever it might be, when you use color alone, it makes it really difficult for them to understand what the meaning is. If you go to the WCAG website and you look up the guidelines for use of color, the one example they always give is in a document where you say items in red are required, right? And that's kind of like a very basic example of what we're talking about, right? But like that's a situation where that could become a significant barrier, right?
Well, we see the bars where one bar is blue and one bar is green, but they're the same luminance value, right? So when you were to look at them in grayscale mode, if you use any of the Office programs, you can see things in grayscale. Well, PowerPoint, you can see things in grayscale mode. If you're an illustrator, you can turn on colorblind mode, right? There's ways to check, And then there are third-party plugins like you use Sim Daltonism. I use the Microsoft color simulations where we can simulate what these things look like. And very often the blue and the green look very different when they're in full color mode. But as soon as you put them into a monochromatic grayscale, they look so close you can barely tell there's a difference. And that's a problem, because if I've got a color deficiency, I should be able to easily identify one color, one item from another. So you can use a label. People always go to pattern fills as like their first knee-jerk reaction. And I think even when I first started doing accessibility, I was like, okay, pattern fill. Yeah, but you can do so much more than that. Put a small shape in there, put a number in there, put a letter in there, label it plainly,
a label.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
you don't have to always go to the pattern. I think there's times when a pattern works, right? I think for like line graphs, I think are a great way to leverage a shape, right? If you can use a shape along that line to kind of identify it. The data points. But yeah, you don't, and not to say a pattern fill doesn't work. It certainly does, but you got to get a bit creative. You can't just start throwing, random patterns in, because then even that starts to look a little, give you googly eyes.
Well, we teach in the design visualization class that we run. We just had one not too long ago. I teach, look, if you're going to throw a pattern in, throw it into the green or into the red. I like the green because it's a little bit easier. But that way, if someone's red-green colorblind, the only one that has a pattern is the only one that's the barrier. So you don't have to have patterns in everything. Just put it in the one thing, and then contrast, as long as you have a 3-to-1 color contrast between adjacent colors, is your secondary marker. So that's a deep dive topic we could spend a whole podcast talking about, but yeah. We've already kind of talked about number 4, which is confusing layouts and inconsistent hierarchy. That really is about the font size and the organization of the structure. I say at least 2-point difference between my heading levels. I want my H1, if I'm going to start, I start backwards. My body copy is 11 point. My H4, if I know I'm going to get to H4, is going to be 14 point. And then 16 point for my H3, and on up until I get to my H1. You could go either direction with it. Start with your H1 and go work your way down. But the idea is it should be easily discernible at a glance as to what is a heading level and what is a subhead of that hierarchy.
Yeah, I totally agree, Dax. And it's also one of the reasons everybody's got kind of a different way that they like to set up their documents, right? But I know a lot of people, they like to name their style using the tag that they're assigning it to.
Yes,
right? So
I love doing that. H1, H2, either I name it that explicitly, but sometimes you end up with more, you have to have duplicates, right? So maybe that isn't always the only way to do it.
Right. But that's where you and I differ a little bit, because I do not like to do that, because I like to be able to, on the fly, change the tag that a style is mapped to.
Sure.
And if I already named it H2, but I'm really mapping it to an H3, that could create confusion for somebody who's picking up the job from me later on down the line. Right.
See, and I just make sure that if I have to remap it, because I've gone through that, where you think you've got everything squared away and some little paragraph sneaks its head in there and you've got to then remap what you've got going on, or you inherited the document from somebody else and you're applying styles and you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then you get halfway through and you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense anymore. Right. But I just go back and rename that style something else.
And you could.
The where it becomes an issue, and this is why I'm doing it less and less, is that Made to Tag is a plugin that overcomes the shortcomings of InDesign so substantially that I really don't design without it anymore. Very seldom. If I'm doing a simple document, sure. But Made to Tag only leverages the mapping of the style. So if I've got a style named H1, normally, if I export that PDF straight from InDesign to PDF and I've labeled it H1, it automatically will map that style to the H1 level. However, if I use the made to tag plugin, it doesn't honor that naming convention. It just sends it out as a p tag. So because I use the InDesign plugin so much, I have to do it. I have to map it regardless of what I call it. Because the reason why I called it H1 is really twofold. One, I like to look at my styles list and know exactly where my heading levels are in the mix. I don't want to have to open something up and figure it out. But number two, I do it so that I don't have to map those styles to the export tag. But made to tag kind of nullifies half of it. So I really have gone away from doing that. On our website, Chad, for those of you who are listening, you can go to our website and download and the accessible InDesign styles template. We've given you a starting point. It's in our download section, and it's free, where you can get what I considered my starting point for creating an accessible document from a style standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I know as a little segue, I don't know if you've run into this, Dax, but I've run into situations where in InDesign, I have literally there's no style applied, right? So, but somehow the user has mapped no style to a heading tag.
It's the basic. It is the basic. They've gone into the basic level and mapped it somehow.
But that would be basic paragraph, right?
But that's
and you're right. Sometimes they do that, but this is no style. Like there's literally no style applied, but somehow they map no style to a heading tag. Like I'll export my PDF and everything's like an H4. I'm like, what is that?
Oh, you know what it is, Chad? I bet they have used the tags panel, which is XML. If you select a block of text, if you select the outer border and then tag that as a heading level 1 or heading level 2 or whatever, because you can tag the actual frame, everything in that will become that tag. I would
No. When you tag the frame, the text still has a separate tag assigned
not
to
using the tags panel.
Yeah, like you're talking about the XML tags panel. Yeah. I don't know. We're diving into the weeds
we'll have to
here.
Test that. Now you know you and I are going to go on a rabbit hunt as soon as this podcast is over to test that out. So no worries. All right. So moving on, right? So we've talked about poor contrast, reliance on color alone, confusing layouts, and inconsistent hierarchy. We've talked about tiny and unreadable fonts in that whole idea of billboards and making things legible, right? Poor focus. Really the WCAG standard, the 2.2 guideline update talks about target size for radio buttons and checkboxes. And it says that you need 24 pixel buffer around any checkbox or radio button. So people who might have hand tremors or anything else have an ability to only select the target they're looking for, right? And so when we design forms, sometimes we want to scoosh all those checkboxes or radio buttons together, usually in a health form, check all that apply. And they're all just one on top of each other. And in a PDF form, I'm using my mouse. I don't know how many times I've gone in and clicked on the wrong box.
So are you saying a buffer between other form elements?
Yes.
Is that what that's saying? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because I mean, like text elements, there's no harm, there's no danger of selecting a piece of text or anything. But if you're talking about other form elements, I totally get that, where you want to have like a buffer to prevent the user from inadvertently selecting the wrong element.
The criteria we're talking about specifically is 2.5.8 target size minimum. It's a AA requirement, which says that your target for pointer inputs, mouse touches, something that you have to click on, is at least 24 by 24 CSS pixels. So it must be that size, right?
Gotcha.
Because someone says, well, you should be able to zoom in. I could put it as close as I want and just zoom in 400%. Yeah, good luck. Try that. Go do that as a user experience where you got to zoom in 1200% to get to those fields.
Well, and let's be honest, like zooming in on a PDF file, especially on your phone, is horrible, right? It's just a horrible experience. And, getting back to the menu example we were talking about, I did a video on LinkedIn. You guys could go back and find it, where I showed how to use liquid mode in Acrobat Mobile that will actually reflow the PDF so you can make the text bigger and smaller. And it's really a great experience. I think the biggest problem I have, Dax, is that showing the average user how to do that is very, very difficult. Right.
It's just, it's a button. It looks like a liquid drop of water. You just click on that and it does it.
No. I'm talking about getting the user to that point, right? So the user scans the QR code or from the restaurant, right? It opens it up in their web browser. How does the user get the PDF from their web browser into Acrobat Mobile?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
You. Yeah, you got to open the Acrobat app and then go into your files area and open that up. And I get that's why that can be a pain.
I really wish there would be a way to say, anytime I open up a PDF, open it in Acrobat Mobile, right?
Yeah.
Like you could set a preference, right? But getting the average user to do that, especially think about that, Dax, our parents, right? Yep. Teaching my dad, I love you, Dad, but teaching my dad how to get a PDF out of his web browser into Acrobat Mobile, it's just not going to work.
And for those of you interested, the AAA standard. And by the way, while we're talking about AAA standard, go on my LinkedIn, look me up. A couple weeks ago, I posted a post on A, AA, and AAA. Do not mistake that A is good, AA is better, and AAA is best. They are very different. It is not. It is everyone should do this. Everyone would, most people would benefit from this. And then for AAA, it is a very select target audience will benefit from this. Right.
Like you're going to pick and choose which AAA requirement you're going to implement, because full on AAA is unattainable.
Right.
You literally can't do it. It's not possible.
Because they fight each other. There's several different AAA requirements that will go against each other. But the AAA requirement for target size is 44 pixels. So if you're really trying to be compliant, these are people with motor impairment, then making sure you've got 44 pixels in between radio buttons up and down, left and right, that's an important distinction to make. So yeah. The next one I find is really a PowerPoint specific issue. People, when they have to make a presentation accessible and then they have to export a PDF, if they have built animations into the slides, the end result is that all this stuff is overlapping on top of each other. So if I want to make a PDF, that page is not going to print out well because it's all mashed on top of each other because it was designed with an animation. So getting people to shift their thought from what I call single slide animation to slide based animation, where you use transitions to go from one slide to another, that basically when the slide is on its own and it's resolved is clear, right? Slide 1 says these 3 things, slide 2 says these other 3 things, and you use transition to blend between the two or show height or whatever, because the PDF is then still accessible.
Yeah. Yep.
So be careful when you have animations built into your stuff. Be thinking about, how am I going to get this out? And if you say, but Dax, no one's ever going to ask for a PDF of this, it's presentation only. Every conference I've ever been to, the first question I get is, can I have the slide deck? And my knee-jerk reaction is no, because I haven't made it accessible. So nope. You can have my handouts, which have all the information. And that really is a good point. You don't have to give a slide deck, prepare a handout that complements your PowerPoint. But many people just want to build it once and, use it for multiple things. So.
Yeah, because the truth is, making the slide deck accessible, you've got some work in front of you. Yeah,
Yep.
in some cases a lot of work, So, you're better off providing an alternate format, right?
Yep.
As handouts, and that way, I know, like, I'm at a point now when I build my handouts, I mean, they're just born accessible. I build them in a way so that when I export it, maybe I got a few things. I know the biggest thing for me is my figures and captions. The way they end up exporting, I have to go in and kind of like unnest them, if you will. But that takes me all but 3 minutes to wrap up and get it done. So
see, and I don't use the captions feature because of that. So I'll use a heading level, or I'll design it in a way that the figures are clearly labeled, so I don't have to worry about labeling it as a caption. But there's lots of instances where you want to use caption, and caption's appropriate, but you have to make those design decisions, right? And if I know I'm going to make a PowerPoint that needs to be an accessible PDF, I'm going to design it in a way that allows me to get it a lot more accessible out of PowerPoint natively. Now, Microsoft has done some huge improvements in the ability to make PDFs or make PowerPoints accessible. Their new accessibility assistant, they just added the reading order pane to people on a Mac. And so definitely improvements there, but there's still stuff that gets through. So thinking about how I'm going to design is really an important thing. So, yeah. Awesome.
So the next one is missing or misleading alt text in visual elements, right?
Yep.
So this is one of the things that we run into a lot. And, a lot of times, right? And so I'm going to say, like, I encourage everybody to really think about if a visual has value or not. Right. Because a lot of times designers are very quick to artifact visual elements because, well, let's be real, they don't want to write the alt text for the object. So in their mind, it's just a lot easier to mark it as decorative or artifact it. That way they don't have to worry about the alt text. But you really want to ask yourself the question, is there value in this graphic element? And
not only is there value in the graphic element, but as I'm describing it, is there value in knowing some of these details? An example I just got in an email from one of our clients. Sorry if you're listening. It says, we asked them for alt text on this visual, and their alt text says, A, left parenthesis, green, right parenthesis, students who bully, colon, and then it gives a description. B, dark green with the left and right parentheses. It has all this extra punctuation, and it has the colors, and it has a colon, and it has all this stuff. And you're like, this is really just A, this, B, that, C, this. And being succinct and meaningful about what you write is an art form. I don't fault the person for doing it this way, but it really takes some practice to understand and listening skills to be able to go, oh my gosh, that is going to be a bad user experience.
Well, and just testing it with a screen reader would reveal that very quickly, right? I mean, you read that graphic and you're going to be lost. You're going to be like, what is it saying? And also, Dax, you had brought this up before, the idea that assistive technology can also often disassociate objects with what they're supposed to belong to.
Data, right? We call it data pairs, right? Data
pairs.
Value. If it says spring 225.
And oftentimes it'll pause at an awkward moment.
Yep.
So it'll say like A, and then it'll say graphic 1 B, graphic 2 C. And so it's associating the wrong thing to the wrong object in the list of elements. So,
well, and usually it's because of punctuation but sometimes it's just the way the screen reader paused. So we always say, use a connector word, is, at, value, something that says January was 215, February is blah, blah, blah. So it's unmistakable. So when it's read wrong, you get that it's read wrong and you understand it. So just remember, there's 3 categories for alt text. One, AI alt text. We're seeing more and more of this. And I just corrected a document just 3 days ago that had a bunch of AI written alt text that said AI generated alt text, or AI generated description, and then it read the description, right? And I'm like, that's probably not what you want in there, right?
Yeah.
And then others that are insufficient. There's not enough information. And then the third category is too much information. So it's really a science. We teach a class called the Secrets of Writing Effective Alt Text, where we go through a lot of this stuff, but just understand that meaningful information. And if you can't fit it all in, Chad, in this alt text, there is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and an intro sentence and a trailing sentence, all in the alt text. And so if you've got to go to that level, maybe a body paragraph near that graphic or at the end would be better, right? And while alt text can be the right solution, a better solution for this would have been to allow the user to move from A to the description, B to the description individually by pressing the down arrow. And they could have easily done it in the way this was presented, but it takes time. You have to do it in the PDF or plan for it in the InDesign file. So again, designing with accessibility in mind, I don't want to build this whole thing in Illustrator. I'm going to build the graphics in Illustrator, but the text layers I'm going to do in InDesign so that I can put it in the right reading order and make it a great user experience for everyone.
Excellent.
Well, good stuff, guys. I hope this has given you some thoughts about how to design with accessibility in mind. By no means is this everything, but it's definitely some major key points that you want to be thinking about before you start designing your next accessible project.
All right, everyone. Well, once again, we want to thank Venngage for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training or struggling to establish an accessibility program in your organization, head on over to accessibilityunraveled.com and reach out to us. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.